two officers thought they had an easy target. What they didn't realize, though, was that he ran the entire department. The sound of gravel crunching under tires filled the quiet evening air as Julian Coleman, a 48-year-old man known for his calm demeanor and strong leadership, turned onto Sycamore Avenue. He was heading home after a long but rewarding day of meetings with community leaders in Charlotte, North Carolina. His black sedan, modest but unassuming, blended into the suburban streets, and his thoughts drifted to the famous pot roast waiting for him at home. But then, blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror, slicing through the night like a siren's alarm. Julian's grip tightened on the steering wheel for a brief moment. He checked his speedometer, 29 in a 35 zone, no traffic violations, no broken taillights. Still, the patrol car's siren wailed, demanding him to pull over. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, signaling to the side of the road. Julian eased the car over, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew the drill. Hands visible, movement controlled, polite and composed. It wasn't because he had done anything wrong, but because he understood that in situations like these, appearances were everything. The officer approached his window briskly, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the dimly lit interior. A second officer lingered near the rear bumper, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "You in a hurry tonight?" the first officer barked, suspicion dripping from his tone. "No, sir," Julian responded evenly, his voice calm yet firm. "Just heading home." The officer's flashlight swept across his face, lingering a moment longer than necessary before moving down to his lap, then to the console, and back to his face. "License and registration," the officer ordered, ignoring Julian's response. Julian slowly reached for his glove compartment, narrating his every move. "I'm getting my registration now. My license is in my wallet. I'll get it after this." The officer didn't respond, but his posture stiffened. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, though the question felt more like a statement. Before Julian could answer, the officer continued, "You were driving erratically back there, swerving into the other lane." Julian frowned. "With all due respect, sir, I wasn't swerving. My dash cam can verify that." The officer cut him off sharply. "Dash cam? Huh? That'll be confiscated for evidence. Step out of the vehicle." Julian blinked, surprised by the sudden escalation. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I'm complying fully." The officer's jaw tightened. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." His stomach churned, but Julian unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door slowly, his hands raised in clear view. The second officer quickly grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the patrol car. "Is this necessary?" Julian asked, his voice measured but firm. "I've done nothing wrong." "Resisting, huh?" the first officer sneered. "You want to play that game? Fine by me." The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Julian's wrists. His mind raced. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was plain profiling. As the officers shoved him into the back of a squad car, Julian glanced down the street. A few neighbors peered through their blinds, their silhouettes glowing in the porch lights. No one stepped outside. But this was far from over. The officers had no idea who they had just arrested. And Julian wasn't planning to stay silent for long. The patrol car rumbled as it moved down the street. Julian sat stiffly in the back, watching familiar landmarks blur past. His mind wasn't on the scenery, though. It was on the absurdity of the situation. The officers up front chatted casually, as if they hadn't just handcuffed and detained a man without cause. The younger officer, Daniels, glanced back at Julian through the rearview mirror. "So, what's your story? Late-night drug run, or are you just like giving us a hard time?" Julian met Daniels' gaze, unflinching. "I'm just a man trying to get home." "Yeah, sure, Reed," the stockier officer snorted. "We hear that all the time. Reckless drivers always have an excuse." Julian bit his tongue. Arguing wouldn't help. He took a deep breath, mentally running through his options. He knew his rights, but he also knew the system, and the odds were slim that it would favor him now. When they arrived at the precinct, the harsh fluorescent lights cast a cold glare over the holding area. Daniels removed Julian's cuffs with almost mocking flourish. "Welcome to our humble abode," he sneered. "You'll be here a while." Am I being charged? Julian asked, rubbing his sore wrists. We'll let you know once we figure that out, Reed replied, smirking. Julian was led into a small, cold holding cell, the door clanging shut behind him. He sat on the bench, his mind racing. He'd spent years building a career rooted in justice and fairness, and now he was the one experiencing the abuse of power he'd fought to eradicate. Outside the cell, the officers leaned against a desk, laughing quietly as they reviewed Julian's license and registration. Nothing out of the ordinary, Daniels said, sounding almost disappointed. Doesn't matter, Reed replied with a smirk. We'll find something. Guys like him always have skeletons in the closet. Julian overheard their conversation, but he didn't react. His expression unreadable, he remained seated with his hands clasped. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. He knew his patience would pay off soon. Hours dragged on, and other officers passed through, casting curious glances at the man in the cell. None of them seemed to recognize him, but Julian didn't expect them to. He was new to the area, having been appointed only 3 weeks ago. Finally, as the first light of dawn streaked the sky with faint orange hues, footsteps approached. Lieutenant Morgan, a stern, no-nonsense officer, appeared in front of the cell. She held Julian's paperwork and surveyed him for a moment. What's going on here? She asked. Picked him up last night for reckless driving and resisting arrest, Daniels explained. Morgan arched an eyebrow. Reckless driving? Where's the evidence? We haven't processed it yet, Reed said, leaning casually against the desk. Morgan turned her attention back to Julian. Sir, do you have any idea why you were stopped? Julian stood tall, meeting her gaze calmly. I was told it was for reckless driving, which I categorically deny. I also have a dash cam that can verify my version of events. Morgan's expression hardened as she looked at Daniels and Reed. You didn't review his dash cam footage? Reed shrugged. We didn't get to it yet. Morgan exhaled sharply, clearly displeased. Get it now, and Daniels, read my office now. As the officers slunk away, Julian knew the tide was starting to turn, but this was just the beginning.